Hello and welcome to the podcast, Your HR Career. I'm very pleased to be here with the rather marvellous Laura Stokes. Hello, Laura.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much. It's a snowy day, the day we're recording, so everybody will remember this in the future when you listen to this on a sun lounger in June. We were knee deep in snow, weren't we?
Frost and ice. It's a winter wonderland.
Exactly, but here we are. So thank you for coming on the podcast. So those of you who haven't listened to us before, we are deep diving into HR careers. So if you're starting a new HR career, in the middle, or not knowing where you're up to, or you're just interested to hear about people's journeys through careers, then this is the place for you. Before I recorded the podcast, I sent Laura some interesting questions. So I'll be referring to those as we go, and I might just nudge her just to be a little bit more interesting. She's been a little bit bashful in a couple of places. So we'll depend, I'll be kind, but we'll see how we feel. So I'll be referring to some of those questions as we go through, just to give you context, but let's get into it. So let's talk about, where did it all begin? I'm always interested to know why certain people got into HR. So tell me about your entry point, Laura. Where did it all start for you?
Thanks Jane, and hello to everyone. I really enjoyed thinking back over these questions, because you often forget how it all began, and how something that was literally an idea as you were perhaps doing your A-levels has turned into something 20, 30 years later. So I did an arts degree at university and did a placement as a teacher in Manchester, where I was studying. I did a couple of terms of that at a primary school, and very swiftly became full of admiration for teachers, but certainly realised it wasn't for me, and suddenly realised I'd have to think about a plan B. I'll be bluntly honest, I was desperate to stay in Manchester. I'd done 3 years, and I wasn't ready to go home to the real world. And so I started looking at postgraduate qualifications at the business school. I'd got a sense I wanted to go into the corporate world, but very much something that was more involved with people, with behaviours, with what makes people tick and work effectively. And dabbled in psychology, had a couple of looks at those types of qualifications, but then landed on the CIPD accreditation. It was called Human Resources MA at the time. Yeah. Really not quite sure what they'd call it today. But I registered on that and started that. So that was a year-long course, and it was quite a wake-up call after an arts degree. It suddenly became very real. It was hard work, and there was placements involved and all kinds of things. But I'd done a week's work experience at the Environment Agency in Leeds just before commencing the course. That was a prerequisite. And about 21 years later, I actually came back to work at the Environment Agency. So I kind of came full circle, with lots of things in between. But nice. That's how I got into it.
So tell me then, let me just pull on that a little bit. So interested in people's behaviour and why people did things, and where did that come from? So an arts degree, are you talking art? Are we talking English or something in between?
History and sociology.
Okay.
And absolutely loved history, still do throughout school. Thought that would be the thing I would end up doing in some shape or form, teaching or some type of academia. Ended up really enjoying the approach that the sociology lecturers took to the work that we did actually in the examination of communities and different cultures throughout history once again. And thought, actually, this is new to me, but I am interested in applying that to my working life. I did look at psychology post-qualification, probably a bit too maths for me at the time. So decided to see how I would overlay that study of people into the business world. And that's where the HR MA popped up.
Fantastic. Yeah, because I'm often interested what the sort of thread is that gets people into HR.
Yeah.
So your thread is kind of people and behaviour and the more of a psychological side.
Definitely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And so the reality of HR then, you were starting to see some of that already during your MA. You said there was a placement, you're starting to get under the skin of it. But sort of one of the questions that I asked you earlier, which I was really interested in your response to, was what was the biggest HR lesson you learned in your early days? Because the reality of doing it day to day and having to handle that is quite different, isn't it, from an academic course? Yeah.
Goodness me, so different. And I think so different from doing a placement as well. I look back and I'm forever thankful at the support and guidance people gave me. But I think even a couple of months into a job, you are kind of left to fend for yourself often.
Yes.
So the reality of a day-to-day career in HR is very different from both studying it and trying it out, if you like, dipping your toe in. And it's worth remembering that. The biggest lesson I certainly learned very on, and it's often through trial and error, is what I believe is a real heightened responsibility at quite a junior level. HR touches all aspects of an employee's experience within an organisation. And that's all employees, right from the most junior individual to the CEO. There will be something in their experience, their work experience, from even before they start the job, where HR will be involved.
So high impact. Yeah.
It's high impact, but at that time you could have low experience, and be quite a lowly grade, but you will still have a high impact on that individual. And that can range anything from the recruitment and selection process, how that individual is made to feel throughout that process, through the onboarding process, certainly through pay and benefits, especially if that, God forbid, goes wrong. And then throughout somebody's progression through an organisation, through the good times and the bad, both personal, professional, their working lives and often their personal lives are touched and influenced and shaped by those in HR. And that's across the team. So whatever role you do, you will be somehow having an impact on somebody's day. That's not to say that there aren't other roles in organisations that do that. But I think what's unique to HR and what I think is a privilege, but also a responsibility, is you get to know an awful lot of people in many varied different situations.
Absolutely agree. But how did that sit with you in those early years of your career? That kind of, as you say, that it's the scale of responsibility, isn't it? And the depth to which you might be exposed to somebody's personal issues or a professional grievance or whatever it may be. How did that sit with young Laura? How did you feel about it?
If I'm absolutely honest, Jane, I'm quite glad I was a bit clueless to it, because I think I would have become overwhelmed.
Yes.
So I think I was so excited to be down in London, which is where I spent a lot of my career and where I had my first proper jobs in HR. So excited to be working with people who, I admired and I was learning from, that I probably just went along with the flow a lot more than I potentially do now. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I had that kind of like undeserved confidence, because it meant that I was absorbing things without getting overwhelmed. It's only now I look back and I think about, as you say, very young, inexperienced Laura dealing with very senior people at quite pivotal points in their career when they were going for internal promotion, etc., or they needed support. I think, wow, that was a lot of responsibility to put on a junior person. But I'm glad I was trusted with that, and I'm glad I learned on the job and from the people around me that I was supported in doing those things early on.
Yeah. And I think that kind of description that you give of being exposed at a junior level, I think those of us who've done those kind of roles, you almost have to grow a thick skin, don't you, quite quickly to protect yourself.
You certainly learn that.
Yeah. And I'm often concerned that within HR, we are quasi coaches, counsellors, we're privy to lots of information, and in other professions rather have some sort of support system around that, whereas HR doesn't have anything. You can go home having dealt with a really difficult, toxic situation, and there's nothing formally to help with that kind of debrief process. How have you managed that through your career personally? How does that work for you?
That is such a good point, Jane. And with all due respect to teams and organisations I've worked for, I think HR for HR still needs some work.
Yeah, agree.
Not to say that, not to say that the HR, that people's expectations of HR being a support, as in practical one-to-one support, is a bit over-egged. I do think that expectations have been mismanaged there for a lot of people, but I think support for HR teams needs some work in most places I've been. I have been fortunate, especially more recently, to have built a network of people I can rely on, typically other HR people, typically within the team I'm currently in, if I'm honest. Yeah. However, I am fortunate enough to still be in touch with people I've worked with previously. And it's not to say that I would pick up the phone immediately, but a couple of weeks later, when I've met them for a drink and we're talking through a situation, I certainly feel better having discussed that situation with someone who's probably had something very similar to deal with and who knows me enough to know that it would have impacted me in a certain way. So
yes,
definitely keep your team and your colleagues close, I would say. And I've certainly learned not to worry too much about admitting to someone that I feel I screwed up or I haven't done my best job there, or just being vulnerable in general. It took me a long time to feel comfortable to do that. And I'm really fortunate in the last couple of years, I've kind of put that past me, and, you know, I'm quite open and honest with relying on people for support.
Yes. Okay. I think that's very interesting. So 2 things on that. I really like this idea of having somebody that you can share experiences with, who probably doesn't work in your organization, but who has had a similar lived experience. I think that's a great takeaway for anyone listening who's thinking about that. This point about vulnerability, I want to come back to as well. Do you think that HR people are quite a tough breed? I think we have to be, because of what we're exposed to. Do you think that gets in the way of us being vulnerable? Or do you think the era that you're a bit younger than me, but even so, we came through an era of work where you didn't admit weakness? That wasn't a big thing. So do you think it's HR people are tough, or do you think it's the world of work you had to try and be perfect? What do you think that is, that lack of vulnerability earlier on?
I'd say my experience is that, yes, HR people are typically resilient.
Mm-hmm.
I've usually picked up an element of gallows humor, I would call it, within the first couple of weeks starting in a new HR team. So, you know, that those themes are consistent. If I think back to some of my first couple of jobs in London, down in London, when I was working in banking, in financial sectors, the HR teams reflected the teams you partnered with.
Yeah.
To quite a humorous degree.
Totally. Yeah.
So if I think about my colleagues who supported the front office traders, they kind of absorbed those personalities and were incredibly tough and verging on aggressive and potentially confrontational for some people. Obviously,
but that was right for that client group.
That was right for that client group.
Absolutely.
I supported back office, so I think we potentially had an easier ride. We could potentially be more authentic, and I would hope we were. But definitely, there was definitely an undercurrent of HR aren't allowed to screw up. They aren't allowed to feel nervous. They're certainly not allowed to make a mistake. And they should know the answer to every single question.
Yeah,
every single question they ask, no matter what aspect of HR it covers, or even not. An awful lot of questions put to HR people in HR, you are still expected to know the answer. And once again, it has taken me until only a couple of years ago to kind of let my foot off the gas when it comes to needing to know the answer to every single question. And being comfortable in saying, let's point you in the direction of someone who might be able to help.
Or even, do you know what? I'm not sure.
Yeah, what do you think is often the response I give?
A nice one.
Yeah.
Do you think that's sort of a personal journey as we all mature in our personal and work life? Do you think that's a confidence that comes with age, perhaps?
Yes, very, very keen to shout out that aging is a privilege, as it were, and it's certainly been that way for me. It's been a privilege to see things through a different set of eyes and to learn different perspectives from different people as time's gone on. There has been a fundamental shift in expectations in the workplace, though. Yeah. I think COVID and lockdown, hybrid working dramatically accelerated that. But if I think about perhaps my last role in London when I worked for the Walt Disney Company, it was changing in terms of people's comfortableness at what they shared at work, how they acted at work, what was expected of them. It was changing. We just had a huge acceleration when it came to lockdown, I believe. And quite rightly, in many ways, we've not gone back to how it was before. And I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. So tell me about, I asked you a question, actually a few tricky questions, but one of them was about the job that you wished you hadn't taken or you shouldn't have taken. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was sharing that with a couple of friends, actually, because I think it's a stellar question to ask somebody. The last thing I would ever want to come across as is cliched or overly sentimental, but I can genuinely say, with the benefit of hindsight, didn't feel it at the time, there isn't a job I regret taking, genuinely. And I'm obviously very, very fortunate to be able to say that. The job that I had in mind when I responded to your question was a job I landed in when I was first back up north. Mm-hmm. And I think I entirely underestimated the difference of the job market, mm-hmm. and the industries that are represented up in the north of England vis-a-vis London.
In terms of what options were available to you.
Exactly. And the cultures of those organisations. I think I was incredibly fortunate in London to work at the time I did. Yes, I had to handle being in FS during the crash. However, there were multitudes of opportunities and people to speak to about different strands of careers and different opportunities. At least it appeared to me. Everything's wonderful in your mid-20s, isn't it? But it certainly felt an abundance. When I came
filled with possibility, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly. And obviously the confidence to go for it. When I came up north, I had entirely underestimated how different the job market was. Now, this is obviously my experience, but I have heard it from other people as well, so I know it's not just me. And how important a network of people who knew you and could evidence your results was. And I just did not have that up north. The last time
you were new to the market.
Absolutely. Yeah. The last time I'd worked up north was pre-university, working in a bar. That was the last time I'd had a role up north. So yes, I was coming back home, but I was certainly coming to a different planet when it came to work. Okay. Now, I was looking forward to this job. I was very, very eager to do something new. And there were an awful lot of positives. The HR team, for example, were fantastic. And they're some of the people I do still lean on to this day. But the culture of this particular organisation was so new to me, so different. The governance structures, everything was just so new. I just couldn't make it work. And it was the first time that I had to admit defeat. And it was a really, really humbling moment. I'd come from down south, having worked for a number of big brands, done well. And I just assumed I would be able to walk into the equivalent. And it just wasn't the case. And we moved back in 2017. And I would say it is only now that I am working at the level I was down in London. And that was a bit of a pill to swallow, I'll be honest. And I am not saying that will be the same experience for everyone. It won't be, but that was my experience, that it took a long time, and obviously COVID came in the middle of it, to build back up to the level that I was operating in London.
Interesting. So if we turn, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about the market in Leeds at that time, and this idea of it being very much about networks. I think, you know, I feel that, you know, I remember that it was a challenging sort of market. So if we turn our thoughts to thinking about what, you know, you've obviously gained knowledge around that, and as you say, even if something doesn't work out well, there are things to be learned, aren't they? Whether they're about ourselves or about that culture or about the role. So kind of what would the number one bit of advice you would give to somebody early on in their HR careers, as you know, reflect back on where you've got to so far? What would be your number one piece of advice?
For someone who's always looking for the next shiny thing, this is a bit of frustrating advice, but it's give it time. Give it time. Yeah. Give yourself time, especially if you're moving to a new environment, new organization, new location, as I did. Give it time. Do not assume that you will walk into a role, it will all make sense, you'll get on with everyone, and you'll have all the answers, even if other people expect that of you. I think I've always been challenged with wanting to meet people's expectations.
Oh, good girl. You're a good girl.
And everyone has been very wonderful in that they've had high expectations. However, that does not mean you're going to be a natural fit for every role and every team. And neither does it mean it's not a winner and you shouldn't keep chipping away. You probably should, but give it time. It has taken me a long time to get re-established back up here. I'm glad I did it, but it's been tough. It has taken me a long time, and I'm talking decades, to grow the confidence to be able to advocate for myself at work and to kind of ride the wave so that I'm landing on a more positive shore than the one I set off from. It has taken me a long time to build a professional network in Leeds that I can rely upon. And it's taken me a long time to learn the norms of a new environment and a new culture. Despite having worked on the peripheries of government and the public sector previously. So I think it would be have patience with yourself, give it time, and as much as you may admire and enjoy working with someone, their experience and their advice may not necessarily be relevant for you. So
that's nice.
Yeah.
Just your journey.
Yeah, everyone will have a different approach, everyone a different perspective, and everyone will have a different outcome. And I've worked with many fabulous people and I've had some great line managers, but many, especially in FS, because I think you're forced to think you have to be confident and right about everything on occasion, spoke to me as if, this is the way to do it, Laura. This is the way to progress your career. This is what you should do, what you should say, how you should dress, you know.
And this is the only way.
And this is the only way, you know, this is the highway to success, as it were. And it didn't necessarily work out that way. They weren't necessarily right for me.
So it's about having that confidence in your own personal journey, isn't it?
Absolutely. Taking what works from the advice, but not taking it as dogma.
Yeah. And you adapt it for you, because everybody's unique. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, we could make a little strap line on that. Fabulous. So tell me about, as we come to our final question, tell me where you are now and what's next for you.
I'm happy to say, as the new year starts, I'm in a really good place. And as you've probably been able to tell from my previous responses, it hasn't always been that way at the start of a new year. I've actually, over the last year now, taken quite a different direction in my HR career. I am HR through and through, so I'm never going to step too far away. But I am no longer an HR business partner, which I've been for the best part of 20 years. I'm now a qualified HR program manager, and I program manage the HR activities across our wider team in the government agency in which I work. And it's been a real privilege to see things from the other side of the fence, to have the time and space to really focus in on particular things rather than embrace a generalist role which I loved in so many ways for such a long period of time, but did leave me often very exhausted due to the number of competing priorities and the lack of space to be able to look at things holistically.
It's very much more reactive, isn't it? Whereas you're
very much more reactive.
Is more proactive,
very much trying to manage numerous demands, numerous people's expectations, all of which differed, and coming up short. Often for yourself. So it's been a real privilege to step out of that, to do something differently, and I am constantly surprised at how fortunate I am to have the good news story and to be able to talk to our wider agency about the fantastic activity our team is doing and their successes. It's such a privilege to do that day in, day out. It really is. And gaining a new qualification, I also gained one in change management. I love learning new stuff. That is definitely something I've taken forward from school and university. And it's been a challenge. It's been a real challenge.
Yeah.
I've been working with people who've been, program managers for decades, but I've really enjoyed challenging myself and doing something new and looking at HR from a different angle and being able to really, really shout about the successes and impact that it makes.
Fantastic. And I think it is the beauty of HR, isn't it, that it is so varied and there are so many different ways that it can be practiced. So I think fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Laura. I'm hoping that everybody listening is thinking, this is a really useful way of kind of thinking about my career and how I might develop. So thank you for being so open and honest with us. I'm interested to see where you go next, of course, whether that continues to be program managing or if you come back into business partnering. But, the joy of HR is you just never know, do you? You never know what might be ahead of you.
Exactly. And I think that would be my last point. Certainly when I was interviewing within the FS city world, you were told to always prepare what your 5-year plan was going to be.
Yes.
When it came to an interview or something like that. I have never had a 5-year plan.
Yeah, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yes. And I'm certainly glad that more recently I haven't had a 5-year plan, because I probably wouldn't have looked at this opportunity.
Oh, okay.
Because it wasn't, to many people, certainly myself, the next logical step. So I'm kind of glad I didn't have a plan, because it really did leave me open to this opportunity. And I'm so pleased I took the plunge.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. We could keep talking, but there's only so many hours in the day. So thank you everybody for listening. I hope you found that of interest. This is one of the episode of the new podcast, Your HR Career. I will put the link to the Substack where the podcast lives in the show notes. You'll be able to find it on LinkedIn, on my website, and on Substack. So I hope you enjoyed listening, and thanks very much.